So when we were in Glasgow, Scotland, we went to the Museum of Modern Art. It was a good choice. It was a rainy day. It was free. It was just around the corner from the hotel. And Modern Art Museum is a good place to kind of get a pulse on the kind of conversations in the society, like what people are concerned about. Sure enough, in kind of this small rotunda, kind of in the middle of the museum, there was a small permanent exhibit about the wealth that had created the city and created the museum and their collection and its connection to empire and colonialism and the slave trade and, as they said, selling addictive products like tobacco and alcohol and sugar, right? And then there was a response, which was like, in response to this, we are committed to featuring artists that are, of course, diverse, with challenging ideas, that also help us chart a way forward. Complicated, right? I mean, systems, generations of injustice. You know, Scotland was a part of the British Empire. Their task is certainly a lot easier than, say, a museum with ancient artifacts, right? You ever been to the British Museum? Here's the Rosetta Stone, and here's the world's largest diamond, and here's Sphinx and statues, and all of this stuff that has been what? Looted from all over the world. And all those countries are like, yeah, we would really like to have our stuff back, thank you. So international courts and museum boards are all like, yeah, we're going to give you this stuff back eventually. And sometimes it's complicated, right? Because maybe the country it was taken from is now ruled by a dictator and oligarch who's just going to take that and put it right in their pocket, right? It's complicated, just like looking at your retirement account is complicated. Even if there's social screens, right? Thinking about, you know, what company was making the bombs that is raining down on Gaza that now I'm enjoying the profits from? Or pulling out your cell phone. I mean, really? Some little kid in some mine took out the minerals and made that for you to use. It's complicated. And even though the systems of injustice are far more complicated today than they were years ago, harder and harder to entangle yourself from, there's always been this kind of system of injustice. And that's kind of what's implicated in this parable. So in the parable, just real quick, you have your rich man who would have been like the absentee landowner, and he has a middleman who's going to manage all of his tenants who owe him money. And then he hears, and maybe it's the people kind of down below who are grumbling, you are mismanaging. So he goes to him and says, I'm going to dismiss you. You're no longer going to get to be my manager. And the manager's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm too old to dig. Now, to be honest, digging was kind of in that day and age like the harshest of the labor, right? So it's like, you're not going to be alive very long. And he's too ashamed to beg. So either one of those positions would have been like really downward mobility very quickly. So he says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to call the people in one by one. I'm going to ask them what they owe. And the amount they owe is exorbitant. It's crazy. It's like 100 jugs of olive oil. It would have been just like enormous. So in other words, the guy at the top is like really oppressing the people, right? Just, you know, just sucking off of their life. And he says, hey, just make that 50 right now. And then he says to another one, how much do you owe? He says, 100 containers a week. Just make that 80. You'd think the guy at the top is like really unhappy, right? Because now he's got a lot less. But he can't get rid of the middleman now because why? There'd be this massive uprising of the tenants. So instead of getting rid of him, he actually praises him for his shrewdness because he's actually kind of outwitted the businessman, right? And so that's kind of like one thing. But then Jesus comes along and says this, you know, wise line. So go forward and make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth. Doesn't that just sound like Jesus? Like just the Jesus you love. Go make friends by means of dishonest wealth. So people who came along and pulled the Gospel of Luke together were like, yeah, that's not really very good. So instead, they like added these other little sayings on there, which float around in other parts of the Gospel, like whoever is faithful in little will be faithful in much. It's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And you can't serve two masters, God and money, because you'll love one and hate the other, right? Well, that makes sense too. But if you'll stay with the parable for a minute, you know, my friend Rabbi Alpert always says that. He likes the tricky Torah passages because that makes you wrestle. If you stay with the passage for a minute, there is so much insight and wisdom in here. New Testament scholar Sharon Ring, she tells us in the Greek, the guy is not the dishonest manager or the unjust manager. Actually, he's never accused of dishonesty or being unjust. In the Greek, he's actually called the manager of injustice. How about that? That's me. That's how I feel, seriously, the world I live in. I want to tell you something. I work really, really hard. Do I work hard, Ellie? I work hard. Do I work as hard as people farming and pulling up our peaches and our apples and our grapes? And do you know how much more I have than they have, right? I mean, so it's like, how do I manage this world of injustice I have? But then, Bill Herzog, another scholar, comes along and says, what you see in this passage is what you call the weapons of the weak, that the people below have figured out a way to band together and sort of improve their situation. And the middle manager, who's been looking after his own self-interest, right, which is the only way we're going to make change in this world, is if we think of what is our self-interest and figure out a way to use that to transform the world. So he's looking after his own self-interest, but in the process, what he has done is make the world a little bit more just, right? Because he has reduced the profits of the person on the top, and he's reduced the debt of the people on the bottom. So it's not like, oh, look, the meek have inherited the earth, right? Let's all go out and celebrate. But the world is a little less harsh and cruel than it was before this happened. Maybe there's kind of a word in there about like what we try to do, as opposed to like Deuteronomy 22 says, you cannot remain indifferent. You can't be indifferent. You got to try to make the world at least a little bit more just, which is what I thought of when I was sitting down to have coffee with Garrett Ray last Monday. Garrett and his wife Andy and their kids Silas and Arden came along last July, a couple of months ago. And Garrett, for the last decade or so, has been serving as a Methodist pastor. And now he's kind of doing a little bit of a different path, kind of serving in a different way. He's over at Community Link at 40th and Troost, working with folks who are close to the street, kind of houseless folks, trying to help them. So Andy and Garrett grew up in Olathe in a tradition that was more conservative and evangelical, and probably fair to say more focused on kind of personal piety and personal purity than social justice. But Garrett ended up going to college, studying philosophy, which kind of began this process of, in his words, kind of deconstructing and reconstructing his faith, which then took him to Duke Divinity School, deconstructing, reconstructing, and all the while kind of his faith becoming more room in this understanding for the gospel's inseparability from building a beloved community where everybody has enough, a world of justice and peace and wholeness. And so then his first call was to a little bitty town, not even a town, Snow Camp, North Carolina, 2-point charge in the Methodist Church that had been a hotbed of Klan activity. So no surprise that the sheriff of the town, who's still there, close to 25 years in Alamance County, has been one of the most egregious, called out by the Department of Justice and ACLU over and over and over for their racial profiling. Like, literally, just like, it's so blatant, like it's a lot of migrant workers, a lot of brown folks who are 5 to 10 times more likely to be pulled over than white folks, right? And then there was the kind of, program, this was early ICE back in 2012, right, where, those officers are literally getting a kickback for pulling people over and getting money from it. And they've just got the like vile video games they play, showing them shooting immigrant women who are pregnant coming. I mean, just unbelievable. And Garrett got involved with an organizing group called Down Home North Carolina that was all about mobilizing power, people who were working poor, and trying to bring them together to build power. And no surprise, this is not well received in his congregation, right? Where the sheriff was regularly celebrated and brought in over election time because it was so hard for them to look at the system of injustice. Makes me think of what our wise friends at Jewish Current have said about the Charlie Kirk situation. He's not just been glorified and idolized and deified in the United States, but also in Israel, right? I mean, they've got yarmulkes with his name on it, and they've got murals, and they're naming streets after him. The little kids are singing his praise. And the Jewish folks at Jewish Current point out that even as Israel is annihilating Gaza, there is still this unbelievable need in their heart to portray themselves as the victim in the situation, right? And Charlie Kirk, it's opportunity to see yourself as the victim. Even people on the hard right here celebrate alligator Alcatraz, celebrate the deportations, brutalize women and people of color and queer folks and librarians and teachers and all of it. You know, there's still just this kind of, we're truly the innocent ones. We're truly the victims here. We're truly the ones, as opposed to just an ability to kind of look at the world we've inherited. This country is so rich with such promise and possibility, so much to celebrate, and also, you know, slavery and genocide of Native people. And like, we can either look at that or we can turn away from that. And you can keep turning away from it and turning away, and we are never going to get anywhere. Listening to Garrett, who for his activism and for his heart, for his involvement, got reassigned, which is another way of saying run off. And I cannot tell you how painful that is as a pastor, to like give yourself to people, stand with them in the broken moments of their life, and then to have that happen. But sitting there talking to him, and I've talked about this before, it's not every day. Sometimes though, sitting with you all, when you open up your heart and you share, and what do I say? I have to look away to keep from crying, because you are so beautiful, because you're just so absolutely beautiful. The center of your heart, just absolutely, and just that feeling as he was talking. And I thought about, you know, a couple of weeks ago when we were reading the story of the Irish writer, and remember the father at the end, how he risked everything, risked his whole life, risked it to care for this little teenage mother who had been thrown away, how he was walking through the town with her on Christmas Eve, asking himself, was there any point in being alive without helping one another? Was it possible to carry on through all the years, the decades, through an entire life without having once been brave enough to go against what was there, and yet to keep calling yourself a Christian and to look at yourself in the mirror? And listening to Garrett, I thought about that. I thought about what the man said about how he knew he was risking everything, how he knew his family would pay, and yet was not the best part of himself shining forth. I felt that just sitting there with Garrett, like this best part shining forth, right? But the parable doesn't even stop there. It's not just like, let's all be the very best we can be, right? Let's all just get out there and challenge and be as loving and caring and just. Jesus says what? Make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth. It's the wealth of injustice. That's what he's saying. He's saying, make friends for yourself it's a way of saying, what friends do you have except for the people who you are with, who you are called to be with, because you know the system needs to be challenged. And thinking of that again with Garrett, I thought about their last name, Ray, which in Hebrew means friend and companion and neighbor. When I was in seminary, a couple of the colleagues got married, and instead of hyphenating their name, they changed their last name to Ray, meaning friend. So sitting there, I thought, you know how you are with someone and you feel your heart sort of opening and thinking, oh my gosh, this is the start of a friendship. This is the start of something I need as kind of an older person, this younger person with a fresh new way. And I've been thinking about that at Peace Church too. I know I repeat myself over and over again, right? Like, this is a hard moment. This is a really tough moment we're in. And how do we be as intentional as we can about our friendships? How do we really take time to figure out how we're going to open our hearts and let other people in? Like Jerry Penland keeps saying, become like the average of the 5 people you're around. You know, the intentionality of deciding we're going to show up, or in Andy's word to say, the muscle memory of staying in community, even this side of COVID, reaching out, trying to stretch, trying to be with one another. So my prayer this season and this day is that the moment we're in right now, which is tricky and difficult, might be kind of a personal reset for all of us, where we really think, what are the relationships that nurture me and stretch me and feed me? And how do I put myself in those and offer myself to those moments, to those relationships, so that the very best part of who I am can come shining forth? Amen.